All right, the SEC coaches meetings are still 2 weeks away in Destin, and Bret Bielema, though, he is already stirring the pot. Nick Saban also has his opinion, and if you follow or you haven't heard, it does carry a little bit of weight. All right, this is SEC Breakdown. We come your way every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time with the very best analysis in the SEC. David Waters and also Mike LaValle. I'm Mark Rogers, and again, we break down SEC football each and every week, even in the midst of May, with spring football way in the rearview mirror and real football still months away. All right, so there were some comments. First, we'll talk Bret Bielema making his comments to Bo Mattingly earlier this week in the aftermath of the NFL draft. We discussed it some last week, and some guys that weren't drafted that were extremely productive players. And it's always a difficult thing to see some of these guys who leave early, in fact, who are then undrafted. And with everything that the NFL has provided in regards to scouting reports and analysis to give these kids some information going into it, things change during the course of the draft. Dominoes fall. Opinions are changed that sometimes cause some of these kids to slip off if there are particular position needs that don't fall their way, and then they're left in a precarious situation, even though we know that a certain level, a number of undrafted free agents will make NFL rosters this year. I think it's been in the mid-30s across the board, but that's all conferences, top to bottom, contributing to that number. So, David, we'll start with you. Bret Bielema makes his case, and he's trying to round up some support from some big-time college football coaches, not just in the SEC, but around the country, to give these kids an opportunity, underclassmen who went undrafted, to be able to come back to school and maintain their status as active players.
You brought up, he's trying to get other coaches, and to me, for the coaches, this would be, they were going to have to start juggling a newfound dilemma if this does happen in building a team roster. We know the team roster is 85, limit scholarship, but rarely do the teams go over. But it would be starting maybe a dangerous precedent of coaches letting players go through spring practice that's already there, and then all of a sudden these guys who don't get drafted are coming back. So, this would be a newfound dilemma for coaches to start juggling numbers, similar to what college baseball coaches do when their players go to the draft and, they have a chance to come back. So that would be really, weird for these coaches to have to start counting back players that they really weren't counting on maybe once they've left. And I think as far as the players go, there's general questions, I think, would they be allowed to hire agents, and what would their withdrawal from school look like? Would they still be in classes, or would they get a reprieve in some kind of way and, not really be mandated to attend classes? And, one big problem I see, with the risk of being unwanted by the NFL and maybe unable to go back to college football, will more underclassmen start, doing this? Will the numbers go up even more for, hey, you have a chance to come back now? So I think we might see even more of a mass exodus of players just trying to test the NFL waters and see what happens. So, and that kind of goes back to the point of these coaches won't know what players they can really count on coming back.
So I believe the coach's heart's in the right place, so I'm going to credit him for that. He feels bad about the situation that these athletes have placed themselves in, and they do have some information, so they're not, in this day and age, for the past 5 or 6 years, I think that's generally what we're talking about, gone into this blind. They have had the information given to them by scouting reports from the NFL to get an idea of where their value is placed. I don't think there's any question that there will be more players who will declare for the NFL draft if this goes into motion. I don't think it will, but if it would, there's no risk, depending on what guidelines are placed around that declaration for the NFL draft. The first thing that comes to mind for me, we already have players that are protecting their status and protecting themselves from injury going into postseason play and going into bowls. That number is only going to grow, which has compromised bowl play, and that hurts me quite a bit. So, Mike, what do you think about Bielema's idea?
Well, Mark, I think it's pretty generous of you to give Bert Bielema the benefit of the doubt that he's always that he's thinking about the players first instead of getting one or two of those guys back for his next team. I'm sure that has nothing to do with it. As with all the player advocates of the NCAA, it's always about the player first, which it should be. But I'm not sure that that's Bielema's complete reasoning behind this. Here's my thought on this whole comment. What Bielema is trying to do is trying to give the players an out for really making a poor business decision. And the way he's proposing to do that is by making it easier to make a poor business decision in the future for athletes. He's concerned about the athlete that chose to become eligible for the draft, and the way he's trying to help that athlete is by making it easier for athletes in the future to choose to go to the NFL draft. So I'm not sure. It's one of these things that we deal with in college football all the time, where it sounds really good about putting the student athlete first, but when it comes to the practical matter, the implementation of the idea, sometimes it just doesn't pass muster. To add a little bit of detail to what David was saying, National Signing Day is in February. Now, of course, the student athletes don't have to sign in February. That's just the first day they can sign. So going back to what David talks about, signing day is in February and the draft is in April. All right, so then the coach has to juggle. If he's got two guys like Dan Mullen does that may or may not get drafted in the NFL, does he sign a class of 18 this year, or does he sign a class of 20? And if he signs a class of 20 and those two guys don't get drafted, what does he have to do to bring those two guys back in the fold? So I think when you look at the actual implementation of it, it probably won't pass the scrutiny of detail. The other issue is, if they hire an agent, are they able to come back? Or do some guys who hire agents not eligible to come back, and guys who don't hire agents are eligible to come back? Is that fair? If a guy leaves school, can he come back? Or maybe he can't come back, but if a guy stays in school, he can come back. And so that hurts his prospects at the combine. So is that fair? The other thing you're likely to see if this idea gains traction is tying it to academics. If a guy is on track to graduate, maybe the NCAA allows him a 6-month sabbatical, a 1-semester sabbatical, and maybe some sort of academic allowance against the 85 scholarship count. But if a guy's not on track to graduate, if he's not current with his academic status and credit hours, maybe he's not allowed to come back if he declares for the draft. Is that fair? So there's going to be, once you look at the details of this, there's going to be a lot of fair, not fair. If this guy does that, that guy does that. I don't think it's going to pass muster once everybody starts looking into the details of it. The other way you solve it is just to not have juniors. You can declare for the draft, but going back to the old days where you can't go through the combine and you can't come out of school, and if you get drafted, sure, you can go to the NFL. If you don't get drafted, you continue on doing what you're doing. So it could go the other way as well. So again, I think it's one of those things that sounds great when you couch it in terms of helping out the student athlete, and that's absolutely a legitimate argument. But once you get to the details, it kind of loses its luster a little bit.
Yeah, Mike, and you mentioned helping the student athlete, but what I'm kind of afraid of is this in a way a first step of admitting, like, for football players, college is now more of a profession while they're in school than it is scholarship first and athletics second. Is this what is it basically this is what they're going to train for? This is what it looks like to me. It can kind of set up to look like, okay, well, football's first and then your academics are second. You're taking this semester off, and whether you get drafted or not, you have a chance to come back. So, and I agree. You said you have some stipulations there about the sabbatical and how they could come back. But I do worry that it sets a look of where football is first and academics are second.
I'd actually also change. Go ahead, Mike.
Go ahead, Mark.
Well, I was just going to say, I was going to play off your first point, Mike, and I think it's a really valid one. I don't think it should necessarily be taken into consideration, but it's kind of a periphery, but that I think is extremely important in the maturation of young men and individuals in general, and that's how many of us get a reprieve in making huge decisions in life. If we take the wrong job, if we move our family across the country, You can fill in the blank from there. Did we get a reprieve? No, we have to deal with the circumstances. We have to deal with the information in front of us, and this is part of the process of growing up. And we're basically giving them a huge safety net in the process. I don't think that necessarily should be taken into consideration, but I think that's part of the maturation process, is understanding that there are pros and cons to every situation. There is hardly ever a slam dunk decision to be made out there that everything lines up and this is the obvious road to take. There's usually a thought process, and you have to go with a combination of gut feeling and how it's going to affect others, and primarily information, and then make the best decision. I do say, Mike, that yeah, let's face it, Bret Bielema is thinking of himself in addition to the student athletes, but I think he's being possibly a little short-sighted here because, okay, he lost one player in Denver Kirkland, good football player. I got to think over the course of time that his chief rivals in the SEC Western Division are going to be hurt far more by this, or are going to be helped more by players coming back after not being drafted in the likes of Alabama and LSU versus what Arkansas brings to the NFL, or those fringe players that don't quite make the NFL. And then one last thing, we talked about school and the academic side of this, and I don't necessarily know how to legislate this off the top of my head, but I think there has to be some connection maintained to school and academics. It can be lightened based on the work and the preparation that needs to go about in preparing for the NFL draft through the NFL Combine and all the academies that they have set up to work out these players prior to the NFL draft in May. But there has to be some level of commitment maintained to school, in my opinion, if this has any chance of being passed legitimately.
And Mark, we talk about the student athlete first. It's going to have two negative ramifications on the academic portion of college life. One, if you're a coach and you've got a 5-star recruit, you're almost not able to redshirt him, because that redshirt year, obviously because the 3-year clock to the NFL draft starts even for the redshirt year, he's not going to be able to use that redshirt year like a lot of guys do to front load their academics. The other thing is, a lot of football players use the spring semester to catch up on their academics and take a little bit heavier of a workload than they do in the fall. If I'm a redshirt sophomore that thinks I can get drafted in the 6th or 7th round and I leave school that second semester, even if I am allowed to come back, I'm probably going to be well behind the rest of the team in my academics, and that's going to hurt the APR. So I think, to your point about the maturation process of the college athlete, part of taking care of college athletes is helping them make the right decision. Oftentimes we forget these are 19, 20-year-old men who still need a little bit of guidance and mentorship in life. So I think the argument of putting the student athlete first is kind of a false narrative in this case. There's a lot of bad parts about the student athlete part about this idea going forward. Those two examples top of mind for me.
All right, David. Anything else on this topic?
Not really. This is one of the I think our next topic. This will be something that they can bring up.
All right. We'll then start with you again, David, in talking about Nick Saban's comments made earlier this week on the Paul Feinbaum show, also made a week or two ago to Adam Rittenberg, who writes for ESPN. So twice on an ESPN platform in the span of a couple weeks, Nick Saban both asked and also then elaborating upon his thoughts that there should be a commissioner to college football. And to take his slice of it, he's basically saying, okay, this person needs to be unbiased. That might be impossible to do, but as far as you can possibly tell from a person's experience and background and connections, this person should be not tied to a particular conference, school, or part of the country. They should be unbiased. They should not be too football connected that they would favor offense or defense in regards to rules changes and flow of the game and all those things. And basically, as we have become familiar with the rhetoric and the phrase, working and making decisions for the best interests of the game is used in Major League Baseball and the NFL for their commissioner. And we've seen it with three recent issues that come to mind: satellite camps, the college football playoff, and also pay-for-play, three hot-button issues that a commissioner may bring a level of centrality to college football and be able to make a decision with some surrounding of wise counsel to come to those decisions. So it's something that Nick Saban feels pretty strongly about. David, your thoughts about a college football commissioner?
And I will start with it. Definitely, you brought up, the other sports that, and it's mainly the NFL that has it. It's the closest thing we'll get to college football. And I think it has to be a little bit more general than that. I don't think the commissioner of college football needs to be suspending players or handing down any type of punishment. That needs to still go on at a school conference level. No one person should be over that in college football. As we brought up, and you brought it up in there, Nick Saban, and you said it's more about the good of the game. This college football every offseason seems to be changing fast. We hear about what conferences are doing and expansion and TV deals, and you said the playoffs is hot button topics, and most recent the satellite camps. It would be nice to have one person looking over. That whole satellite camp thing was boggled and fumbled from the get-go. At first it was here, and then they take it away, and now 2 weeks later it's back again. It would have been nice for one person to sit there and look at that, been able to look at that and lay all the pieces out and what's best for college football. And I will say the type, yes, it will be very hard to get someone with no bias. It should not be anyone with a former coach or any ties to a university as far as like on the field level. It's going to have to be someone who is used to dealing with the ADs and presidents of the universities, dealing with TV contracts and numbers, and coaches have no business being talk about that type of stuff. I don't think. But I go back to it's. And Mike mentioned it last week. What we're facing with college football now and expansion and stuff like that is football was built on regionalism, and that's kind of what we've lost a little bit with all these new TV deals. Missouri joining the SEC, Texas A&M joining the SEC, leaving the Big 12, Nebraska leaving the Big 12 and the Big 10. We lost some great college football rivalries, and I also think that's part, for the good of the game. I think that's part of what the commissioner can do. Yes, these conferences are the one who are going to make their money in these TV deals, but I also think we lost a bit of what college football is about when this happened. I think the commissioner stepping into that role would really help that.
Go ahead, Mike, your thoughts about a commissioner for college football.
Look, this idea is even less well thought through than Bielema's idea about bringing juniors back from the draft. The only reason Nick Saban made these comments was so that people would stop talking about the satellite camps and talk about whatever Saban said. So he just kind of threw this out. I'm convinced that's why he said that, so that people would stop talking about satellite camps and stop talking about Jim Harbaugh. Where do I start? First of all, the NFL, Major League Baseball, those commissioners are in charge of one thing, that league and that sport. When you talk about college football, you can't talk about college football writ large without talking about the relationship that the programs have with their schools and that the programs have with the other athletic programs within the college. College football doesn't operate by itself. Before we came on, we were talking about if the SEC ever expanded to 14 teams, North Carolina's a natural geographic fit, but North Carolina would never come to the SEC. Why? Not because of football, but because of basketball. So you can never have a large-scale 30,000-foot conversation about college football without including the conversation about college basketball, college baseball, et cetera, et cetera. The other thing is these commissioners in pro football and pro baseball have staffs of lawyers, that there's unions, there's laws or regulations. They have to testify in front of Congress sometime. You don't have that with college football because it's really a loose confederation of the entities that make up the NCAA. The presidents of the university are the people who make the power, make the rules, and administer the NCAA. And if you talk about somebody who can't punish people, but kind of works with the TV contracts and kind of oversees the direction where the game goes. That kind of sounds similar to what we have with the head of the NCAA. So when I think of a commissioner of college football, really I think of Mark Emmert in a little bit more focused role than what he is today. So again, I go back to my first point. This idea about a commissioner for college football is less well thought through than Bielema's idea about bringing juniors back. I'm convinced Nick Saban made the comment as a completely for the reason of drawing the national narrative away from Harbaugh and satellite camps back over to something Saban said, and just to get Harbaugh and satellite camps out of the national discussion. I'm convinced that's the only reason he made the comment.
So the title.
Here's the other point. Here's the other point, Mark. We talk about finding somebody who's unbiased, who doesn't have a regional affiliation, who's not offense focused or defense focused. You find me one issue or one person in college football that everyone can agree on. I'll wait. You're not going to find it. There's not one person. And if he or she's not unbiased or isn't tied to some part of the game, then fans are going to complain that they don't know what they're doing. And then they'll make some rule, and a guy like Saban or Harbaugh will complain about, he or she, they don't have the experience requisite to make this decision. They're not listening to the coaches or the athletic directors. So, I mean, you can't have it both ways. You just can't. Again, I'm convinced Saban said it just so people would stop talking about Harbaugh and satellite camps. That could be the only reason he said this.
Well stated. And if you take the title commissioner to the truest sense of the word, then you take it to the breadth that you talk about with Major League Baseball, the NBA, and the NFL. If you're only talking about a certain, so there would have to be a determination on how much power does this individual have, and to David's point, what issues do they delve into? And then to your greater point, Mike, all the complexities of the institution, the academics, the other sports, the regionalization, all the things that the NFL and the professional sports don't have to deal with, because they deal with basically, we want to make money, and that's the only sole purpose that they exist, basically, is to make money and work within a silo. But if we're going to limit the commissioner's realm and their authority to just the structure of the college football playoff and scheduling, then here's your candidate right here. I'll take on the commissioner's role. If that's all I need to deal with, I can clean up those two issues, and the rest can be left up to somebody else, or can just continue as it currently exists.
So we're going to
I'll second your nomination on the condition that I'm the deputy commissioner.
Uh-oh, you're going to keep me in check, Mike. I can't go to a 16-team playoff, and I can't go to a formula schedule.
That's your Big Ten bias coming through, Mark.
So that's another reason I can't be the commissioner, even though I publicize myself as a completely neutral college football analyst, of course.
Where were you born? That's the question. Where were you born?
I was actually born in Chicago. So I guess that doesn't help either. I know what answer you were expecting. I was actually born in Chicago. But the 6 years spent in Mississippi, that balanced it all out in covering the SEC.
Yeah, clearly a Big Ten bias if you're born in Chicago.
All right. Good stuff there. I can't really combat that. So, yeah, bias exists everywhere. It's unfathomable to me that you can select that person. So another great point by you, Mike. That person doesn't exist, and if they are completely brought in from the outside, they're a complete outsider, very intelligent human being, yes, at some point they're going to make a decision where college football fans or the coaches are going to jump all over them for being not knowledgeable at the game, because they're coming out at it from an outside perspective. All right. So Nick Saban with a smokescreen, according to Mike, in trying to divert our attention from the recent satellite camp talk. All right, do we have anything else going on in the SEC this week that we need to discuss?
Maybe not SEC, but I guess national. What do we think of the Big 12 expansion rumors and Memphis, I guess, being where it came out today, probably being the leading candidate, and the FedEx head saying he'd throw a whole bunch of money at the Big 12 if Memphis came along.
Well, before Mike jumps on this, I can at least stand with Mike shoulder to shoulder on this topic because unfortunately the Big 12, more than the other conferences, I'm going to say, has been obliterated in regards to the respect for the regionalization of the conference. West Virginia and some of the schools that they're talking about now bringing into the Big 12, delving into Florida to pluck out a South Florida or a Central Florida, going up to Boise State, going up to BYU. I can understand that to a degree in terms of the geographic landscape, but some of these other schools they're talking about, Connecticut going all the way up to the Northeast to grab a school that's going to play the likes of TCU and Texas Tech is insane. But it all comes down to money.
But if it comes down to money,
Yeah,
what does UConn bring? What does a school like UConn bring in Central Florida and South Florida? I don't agree with that. Like, there's a reason those schools are in the AAC and Conference USA that they're looking at. I don't see. Yes, it probably gets them in line for a championship game. It gets them in line for a possible conference network. But I don't. Those schools. Overall, it's
all about territory, is what
right.
it is. Florida it's about recruiting base. We can make our push into Florida, and so the Big 12. No, are they gonna? Are the schools South Florida and Central Florida going to outfight the SEC powers in Miami for the very best? But they'll do much better being Big 12 schools and fighting for that second tier athlete, and they'll get their stranglehold into Florida to a certain extent, and then you go to Connecticut if that's the reach, and you grab the Northeast market and New York City. I think that's a stretch. I think the Big Ten, their commitment to Rutgers makes a lot more sense from that standpoint, and I don't even think that makes a difference in getting into New York. If you know anything about New York City, they could care less about college football, and if they care about college football, they care about Notre Dame, Ohio State, Michigan, etc.
Don't forget about Army.
Okay, Army.
So on the Big 12, on the Big 12 expansion, I think Houston is a natural fit. I think Houston's good. I think Houston will continue to grow. I think Tom Herman's a pretty good coach. Geographically, it makes sense. I think when you talk about Memphis, I think the Big 12 might be getting a little ahead of themselves and might be short-sighted for the Big 12 to look at Memphis. One, I don't think Memphis has the ability to sustain success. They've had a good season here or there in the past, but they're caught. They're only about 45 minutes from Oxford, maybe an hour from Oxford. Memphis is obviously in Tennessee, so it gets recruited heavily by Tennessee. They're not too far from Arkansas. So Memphis is a place where I think the University of Memphis is really lobbying the Big 12. University of Memphis is taking advantage of their really good season and the position the Big 12 is in. So Memphis has a little bit of leverage here. I think it would be awfully short-sighted for the Big 12 to take Memphis just off their really good year. From Memphis's perspective, another case why they want to go to the Big 12 is Memphis is really a basketball school. People who are from Memphis know that it's not a high school-dominated sports scene. It's an AAU-dominated sports scene, and basketball is really king in Memphis. So I think Memphis is really putting the Big 12 between a rock and a hard place. That they're lobbying them hard for inclusion. I think it would be short-sighted of the Big 12 to go into Memphis, kind of right there in Ole Miss's backyard, Tennessee's backyard from a recruiting perspective. You got Arkansas pretty close to. They recruit the Memphis area hard. So it would be hard for the Big 12 to break into there. So the question for the Big 12 is, who's that number 12 team if you assume Houston's 11? You got Colorado State out there. Not really sure if they want to go that direction. But the other thing with the Big 12 is it's got to pass with Texas and Oklahoma.
So I totally agree, Mike. I'm sorry, Mike. I totally agree that Houston makes the best case, and that's the best fit for a number of reasons that you outlined. I think Florida, the South Florida, Central Florida reach is a boom or bust proposition. And if just as a college football fan, not necessarily as a Big 12 guy that is looking out for the best interests of the conference itself, but as a college football fan, I go to Boise State and BYU. I think that's the natural fit from a geographic standpoint and from a football playing standpoint after Houston, but then you would have to go to 14, and I think grabbing just a Boise State or a BYU by themselves, I would like to see that stretched out and both of them come into the fold for the Big 12, so there's a rivalry built between those two schools.
That makes sense, Mark. Makes sense.
But
All
yeah,
right, a good topic there. Got anything on that one, David?
Yeah, one more thing. What happens? It's like Mike said. It's Texas and Oklahoma who kind of write the checks for the Big 12, and that Longhorn network is standing mightily in the way of whatever the Big 12 can do as far as network and building a conference championship. It's Texas and that Longhorn network. It spews ugly, it spews ugly aspects of how other teams look at that conference.
Hey, Mark, let me ask you a quick question. Speaking of BYU and television networks, doesn't BYU have their own independent TV network as well?
Yeah, they do, and I don't know much about it, but they do. Yes, so that is one barrier in reviewing these schools that I came across or was reminded of as well. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, the Big 12 has been killed by Texas's independent network. I don't know if they'd have the stomach to take on another school that has their own independent network.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know.
All right, good stuff. We do this every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock Eastern Time with Mike LaValle and David Waters. I'm Mark Rogers. This is SEC Breakdown. And again, 9 o'clock on Wednesday night. And we post this to YouTube. And you can find us on Twitter. Please find us there. Follow us on SEC Breakdown. All right, guys, good discussion. We'll do it again next week.